Are you leading or managing a team and worried that you don't have what it takes? It's natural to feel this way. Teams and organizations are all different and can change over time. In today's Build episode, we'll explore how to gauge your environment, adapt your skills, and suggest some experiments to help you grow as a leader and support your team. So stay tuned. Welcome to Build, the show that debunks a number of myths and misconceptions related to building products, companies, and your career in tech. I'm your host, Purnima Vijay Shankar. In order to have successful outcomes, like nurturing new talent, shipping a product, and building a company, you need to start by taking the time to develop your teammates. This can be challenging, whether it's your first time leading or your fifth time. The reason it's challenging is because of all of the variables you need to account for, such as a changing organization's environment, the skill level of your teammates, and goals and objectives of the company. Does this sound familiar? Well, don't worry, because in today's episode of Build, we're going to showcase a number of best practices to help you out. And to guide us, I've invited Laura Hogan, who is a coach and trainer for managers and leaders in tech. Thanks for joining us today, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So you might recall seeing Laura in a Build tip back in 2017 on public speaking. If you missed it, I've included a link to it below this video. Now, Laura, this is such a treat because I've been following your work for quite some time, and I've always wanted to learn from you.
Thank you. I'm honestly so excited to come and chat about this stuff with you.
Yeah. Now, people in our audience may or may not be familiar with your work. So let's start by just having you share your background and how you got started in engineering and why you transitioned into engineering management.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a self-taught front-end developer. I started back in the days before CSS was even really a thing. And so for me, over the years, I've always wanted to, get more experience in tons of different, fields. My original degree is actually in philosophy. So it's been a wild ride for me to where I am today. Eventually, I started to realize it was kind of fun thinking about leading teams or managing teams, but mostly, kind of from the sidelines. How can I support groups of people to help ship incredible things? Over time, I more officially tried out engineering management, and it turns out it was just like the most fun thing I ever got to do.
Yeah.
Eventually, I became, engineering director at Etsy, and after that, I was the VP of engineering at Kickstarter. And then today, I run my own coach and training business, helping managers and leaders, not just in engineering, but across disciplines, kind of figure out how to be better at their jobs.
It's wonderful. And you're also a prolific author, and your recent book is called Resilient Management, which I admit I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. Tell us what prompted you to write this book.
Oh boy, it was honestly so many years of both like managing teams and the kinds of things that would come up managing managers on those teams and supporting tons of managers across the organizations I worked in. And even up until today, I have coaching calls with a bunch of different managers and leaders of all levels, all disciplines. So the themes that came up for me, in the book actually came up through many years of like, what were the most common topics that I, coached formally or informally some folks through.
Okay. And what's the focus of the book?
The focus of the book is about the subset of skills when it comes to being a good manager that have to do with like supporting the humans on your team. There's like when you think about the whole discipline of management, there's so many other skills like, how do we develop roadmaps? How do we think, about strategy and execution? But I really wanted to hone in on that subset of skills that I would say 50% of skills that you need that are more about like, how do you support these individuals, especially individuals who are different than you? And like, how do you manage the energy drain and the pretty exhausting work that it is to be a manager?
Yeah. And in the book, you provide a very specific definition around team. Do you mind sharing it with us just so we are all on the same page?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually included this definition because like there's so many different ways to think about like your team. Just like there's so many different ways to think about being like a quote unquote manager. Like you might be an informal manager or a formal manager, but that's why I wanted to kind of define these things. So from the book's purpose, I wanted to define a team as, two people or more of a group of, folks aligned towards a strategic objective. So everybody's kind of rowing the boat in the same direction. And again, that could be like a formal structure. That might be an informal structure, but I think about your team as like this unit, or your teammates as the people who you support and work closely with day to day.
Yeah. Now, coming back to your context for the book, you mentioned two skills, human growth as well as resiliency. Why did you decide to focus on just these two skills?
They're so juicy.
Yeah.
But also, honestly, these are the things that I find folks, human beings are struggling with the most. How do I grow? How do I remain resilient through weathering lots of, storms of change, whether it's in your life or within your organization? And then also, how do I support this group of people, my teammates on this team? How do I support them as they grow and as they need to remain resilient through all of those, weathering all those storms?
Now, I know there are a number of best practices that you highlight in your book. Before we dive into them, do you mind sharing with us how you went about testing them? Because I know people might be thinking, oh, are these best practices for a startup or a
Totally.
big company or just for Laura Hogan?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of the stuff that I talk through in the book and that I'm eager to get into in this video really come from a bunch of frameworks that are not my own. There's a bunch of stuff that, whether it comes through how humans react to surprising events in their lives or the stages of team dynamics. This is nothing is Laura Hogan specific, and it's certainly not tech industry specific. The kinds of stuff that I walk deep into in the book really have to do with the tech industry context via examples, but this stuff is kind of core to all human beings when human beings come together and again work towards a strategic objective together.
And as I was reading, I relearned a valuable prerequisite when it comes to leading, which is taking pulse of how your team is functioning.
Oh
So
yeah.
tell us why this is important before doing any skills development and how to go about doing it.
That like taking the pulse beat, it's actually hilarious to me how many managers hop into the role and are like, let's enact some change. Just like I want to, make this better. I want to help out my teammates without realizing you've kind of got to be a sponge mode first. You've got to listen to understand what's the dynamic, what's the environment that we're working within, what should stay the same and should not change, and also what should change. I usually recommend spending at least 30 days in any new role being in that sponge absorption mode before actually going out and changing things. And there's 4 stages of team dynamics that I recommend that new managers, new leaders within an organization or within a team kind of smell out. This comes from Tuckman's stages of group development. So the first one is the forming stage. This group has come together in its new form. It's like a collection of strangers that don't really know each other all that well, or even if they do, they're not sure how to work together yet. Team norms haven't been defined. Then it moves into the storming stage, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's like you got to feel a little bit of friction, you got to feel a little bit of like clashing in order to make it to the next stage, which is that norming stage. It's like business jargon, right? So like it has to kind of fake rhyme with each other.
Fair. Yeah.
But that norming stage is when that group of strangers has kind of begin to work through their friction and develop those team norms and like team processes. They understand what each other is about a little bit more and how they should work together. And then eventually the team moves into the performing stage, which is effectively like high performing. You've hit that flow state, you're shipping.
Nice.
Unfortunately, it can like restart. That's just like a cycle, right? Like it's not like
Right.
you're done at the end of that performing stage. Anytime something changes, the mission changes or a new team member gets added or the manager changes, that you're going to restart those cycle state, feelings again. So I would recommend wherever you're at in your team, even if you're not a manager or a leader, go ahead and like start to smell like which one of these stages is my team in right now.
So let's take a dive into the first one, forming. Why is this important, or what's important in this stage?
Yeah, this is like the clean slate,
Mhm.
stage. Again, even if a group has been together, let's say you just added a new team member, you actually kind of start over again with the clean slate. Like how does this group of humans come together and eventually make it through and ship, pretty awesome things together. So from my perspective, taking that pulse, getting information is so important for managers and leaders because like you got to know about what's unique about each of these individuals and how they come together. Like you might have some folks on your team who love to be recognized for their work and other folks in the team who would prefer to just never be spoken to and sit in a corner. It's really important to kind of gather that data that way you as a manager can understand not just how all of these humans can fit together, but also what you can do to best support them.
And I love how you outlined 6 core needs in the workplace. Do you mind sharing all of them with us?
I love talking about this. So this is from Paloma Medina's work. She released this acronym BICEPS to help us all have like a handy way to remember these 6 core needs that humans have at work. So if you imagine like above Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is like safety and shelter and other things that we need to survive, at work we've got 6 additional core needs. And just before I get into them, I want to call out like whenever one of these core needs is like threatened or undernourished, our amygdala, the fight or flight response, our lizard brain, it'll flip online because its whole job is to like look for threats in our environment. So one of these core needs is unmet or again undernourished, it's going to have that fight or flight response, which is real tricky. So these 6 core needs, the acronym is BICEPS, which I love to think about someone flexing when they're talking about their core needs at work. So the first one, the B, stands for belonging. This is all about, how do we relate to the group as a whole? How do I, how am I sitting in this circle with everybody else? When we feel othered, when everybody goes out to lunch without us, this core need will feel threatened because we want to understand how we relate to the whole group. And again, coming back to the amygdala, like the thing that's helped us survive for this long as humans is being part of a group. So you can understand if we start to feel othered or left behind, it's like not a insignificant thing to our amygdala. Our amygdala is going to wake up and be like, fight or flight mode. So core need number 1, belonging. The next one is the sense of improvement or progress towards a goal, towards a milestone, or just general progress over time. This could be a sense of improvement or progress for us as an individual. It could be for our team. It could be for our organization, be for a project. I often, when I talk to engineers about their frustration over inefficiency, this tends to be like a lack of improvement or progress towards a goal. I can see you smiling, like we all can feel this like innately deep inside us. Yeah, but if we feel like we're stagnating or our team is stagnating or we're distracted and the thing that we're working on doesn't actually, ladder up to the higher level initiative, this stuff can feel real tricky, real sticky. And so again, our amygdala might wake up. The C stands for choice, which is effectively like autonomy. How much choice and decision-making power do we have over how we do our work, where we do our work, kinds of work we get to do. This is a tricky one because, you kind of have to have like the right balance of choice. Like too much choice is just as tricky for our amygdala as too little choice. So, there's a couple of these in biceps, like we want to find the good balance of. And again, like if this feels undernourished or threatened, like we might get into fight or flight mode. The E stands for equality or fairness. We want to believe as humans, right, that everybody has equal access to what they need to survive, equal access to information, equal access to resources, right? Like we want to believe that everything is fair. And as we all know, like if humans perceive a lack of fairness, we will literally take to the streets. We will riot about it. Companies have seen, usership decline, terrible reviews. It's equality and fairness is a core need that we have at work. Where am I? That's an E, right? So P is for predictability. Like we want to understand like what's going to happen for us in the future. This is like a sense of certainty. And just like choice, we want to find like a balance of predictability. When things feel too unpredictable, like in a startup environment, can be really threatening for our brains, but also when things feel too predictable, right? It gets boring. We'll get de-energized, totally demotivated. So again, just like choice, we got to find that right balance. And then the last one is significance, which is effectively status. We want to understand where we fit in the hierarchy. And this isn't so much about like, I want to continue to get recognition and lauded and promoted. This is just as much about, where are my peers at? How am I being assessed fairly? If someone who you perceive to be your peer is promoted or getting recognized and you're not, again, this could be the fairness core need, or it could be the significance core need. Like I want to make sure I'm being assessed fairly. My significance is ranked fairly, all of that stuff. So as a whole, these 6 core needs make up biceps. And I love talking about this stuff because usually whenever someone displays like a surprising human emotion, at least one, maybe more than one of these core needs going, again, undernourished or threatened.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to enumerate them because I do think it makes a huge difference. And probably as people are listening and tuning in, they're thinking, oh, maybe that's why I felt a certain way, or maybe I need to treat people who I'm leading a certain way as well. So
Yes,
it's good. It's good to have that
definitely.
awareness. Yeah. Now, you also mentioned that helping your team get to know you is important. And I don't
Yeah.
know about you, but I've noticed a recent trend where people create this README, which
Yeah,
has come under a lot of scrutiny because it
totally.
honestly just seems like it provides managers or leaders with an excuse for their behavior.
Yeah.
So, how would you suggest people get to know them as a leader instead of that README that kind of gives them an out?
Totally. So I actually used to recommend the README approach, and then over time I started to realize my like ideal view of how managers were using this was totally going sideways. Like in my ideal, wouldn't it be amazing if a manager was like, hey, here's what I'm optimizing for. Here's how I think about management. Like, let me hear about you too, teammate. And it's like a collaborative setting expectations conversation. In reality, though some managers did that, I think, pretty effectively, other managers were totally writing these documents and it sounded more like, here's all my flaws. And just by writing this down, you got to excuse me from, anything that I do, because at least I've told you how bad I am at giving feedback or about being clear with my words, whatever it was, which is just such a bummer. So for me, I've tried to change the conversation from being, just about readmes to instead being about how do you set expectations with your team? And this just isn't about you as a manager or about just an individual teammate, but like as a whole, how are we thinking about team norms? What's our North Star as a team? How do we want to collaborate with each other? How do we want to communicate? And necessarily as part of that, whole list of expectations, there's going to be stuff about individual teammates and also about you as a manager. But like, it can't just be like a like one directional, you are telling your team what you're about and like they must abide by either what you're about or like how you think this team should run. For me, it's much more about like, okay, how can we create a collaborative and communicative setting?
And I like how you do ask that question, what are you optimizing for? Tell us why this is an important question to think about.
I love this question, frankly, especially for engineers, because we're all optimizing for something. I mean, every human is, but I feel like if I can get cheesy, right? Like, what's your leadership or management philosophy? It just doesn't feel very that good. But what are you optimizing for is actually a really similar question. When I think about management or leadership, like how am I oriented to it? Or like as I'm behaving as a manager, what is it that I'm optimizing for? So for me, the what are you optimizing for question tends to be a really powerful tool in anybody's toolbox, especially a coach's toolbox, because it can help unlock like, okay, how am I uniquely positioned to be thinking about management or leadership? What's my deal? And for me personally, the answer to this question, like what am I optimizing for as a manager, is like I believe that humans have the answers inside themselves already. I don't need to like tell them what to do. So what I'm optimizing for is helping them find those answers again inside themselves already, rather than mentoring or giving advice. I go for a much more coaching mindset, and that tends to be like what I would call my management or leadership philosophy. But it's actually the answer to the question: what am I optimizing for?
So let's move on to the next stage, which is the one that I know most of us have dealt with,
Yeah,
storming.
totally. Yeah, so storming is like a bummer, right? Like we all wish we could just skip over this stage. It feels terrible, but we actually do have to feel some conflict. We do have to feel some friction in order to develop some of those new norms and new ways of working together. If everything was just a piece of cake, my guess is that there's like stuff that's going unsaid. So really try to spot those areas of friction or just like what are the elephants in the room and see if you can kind of talk through them. So usually this looks like giving lots of feedback, someone's behavior is causing some friction or causing some stumbling on the teams, feedback is going to be really important for that. You, as a leader or a manager, you may also be responsible for growing your teammates and helping them find new patterns of behavior. And that might look like mentoring, which is advice giving, coaching, which is again like helping them find the answers inside themselves, or sponsoring, which is much more about giving them opportunities to do visible and developmental assignments to help them stretch and grow. But again, those team norms are really critical. So if you're in that storming stage, retrospectives are amazing. Make sure you've got some clear feedback processes. And also, going back to that README stuff, like make sure that you as a team have set expectations for what's expected behavior on the team. That way it makes it much easier for people to give feedback and for you to point out when, people are behaving in a way that's like not in line with what the whole team has agreed upon.
And this can be a lot to tackle, especially when you are going through some organizational friction. So, how would you recommend people balance out each of these things, the mentoring, the coaching, the sponsoring, and the giving feedback?
Oh, totally. And these are all individual skills that like take so many years and like experiences to build, right? The first time that I need to give feedback, probably the first 1,000 times I need to give feedback, I did not necessarily do that effectively. It takes lots of practice and lots of experimentation and lots of like learning, right? There's books, but there's also training courses, and there's plenty of mentors out there that can help you with this too. Pick at least one skill that you don't do like a lot, and start to practice it. Start to find opportunities to practice it. Each individual on your team is going to need more of one of those skills than the other from you. People who are brand new to their role or brand new to the kind of problem, they're probably going to need mentoring, right? They need your help getting unblocked. Unfortunately, most managers default to mentoring over all of the other skills because it feels good, right? Like you get to like bequeath your information and your knowledge to someone else, but actually that's not what helps people grow. If you've got someone who's looking to grow or who's ready to grow, coach mode, right? That's actually the thing you should go into. Ask lots of open questions, offer lots of reflections. I go into a whole bunch of stuff on how to do this effectively in the book, but definitely practice stopping giving advice and starting to ask questions and get curious to help this person introspect. Some people who are like emerging leaders or ready to get to the next level need sponsorship, which is effectively giving opportunities, right? Giving those visible and developmental assignments, feeling on the hook to get them to the next level. And so for those people, like again, sponsorship mode is the thing, and you need to actually practice looking out for those opportunities, making sure you're giving them out fairly to people. And then again, feedback. Like this is one of my favorite topics to talk about because it just is necessary in all aspects of our lives, not just at work. And it's something that humans just generally don't do all that effectively. So yeah, any of these skills, I would say pick one that you don't do a lot of to start and try to learn and get some experience in honing that skill.
And hopefully there will be a break in the storm and there will be the norming phase that comes in.
Totally.
So let's dive into what's valuable to do in this stage.
Oh, yeah. So in that norming stage, you start to develop those norms. Make sure that you are documenting all of those like new team norms that have been formed. Formed in norms. Yeah. So like wiki pages are great for this. Make sure that they're like, can treat them as living documents because you don't want these to go stale. You don't want like whatever new beautiful team norms are, a vision and mission statement or processes for doing feedback. You don't want any of this stuff to just like, get old and stagnant over time. So make sure that whatever you're documenting is, in a living document repo somewhere. And like actually make sure that people are giving feedback to each other. Start to build in that feedback culture. That way, anytime someone's behaviors fall outside of those defined team norms, it's not just you who feels obligated to give feedback, but everybody feels equipped to give feedback to each other to help continue to course correct. And then to iterate on those team norms over time. You'll experiment with them. You'll see what's working, what's not. Give yourself some check-ins over time. Like put a little calendar reminder for yourself to check in on any standing team meetings. Are your retrospectives working effectively? How else can they be improved? How's your cadence for one-on-ones and what you're covering in them? Really genuinely anything that your team is doing that has a pattern to it, give yourself a reminder to check in on it over time and make sure that it's still working effectively.
And I think one thing that came up in your book is around those check-ins is also setting clear expectations. And as a first-time leader, I know early on I struggled with this because I didn't want to seem like I was micromanaging people because in the past I had been doing a lot of micromanaging.
Totally.
So walk us through why is this important and what does it look like?
Yeah. This, again, you don't want to be either end of the spectrum, right? The leader who doesn't set any expectations and the leader who becomes the manager read me terrible, failure mode leader. You want to find someplace in the middle. And honestly, that's where the collaboration comes in. So for me as a leader, I also had to learn this, just like you. It's so hard to remember that this needs to be like a thorough bought-in process for your whole team. So as an example, developing a vision and a mission statement or a VMSO, a vision, mission, strategy, and objectives document. I recommend not just being like, hello team, I've decided on these 4 things for our team and then hand them down from on high. Instead, find some exercises, throw some post-it notes up on a wall, make some collaborative opportunities for people to all participate in the shaping of whatever the team norms, team expectations are. Again, that setting expectations whole deal is about collaboration, communication, and then documenting all of those expectations.
And hopefully if that goes well, then you get to the final stage, which is performing. Yeah. And people that are tuning in may be skeptical, either because they've been in firefighting mode, there's a lot of reorgs. So let me ask you, is this even possible to get to a stage where you are performing as a team?
Absolutely. If folks haven't had that experience, I'm so excited for the first time that they get to have the experience of being in a high-performing team. I wish I could say that it lasts forever. It doesn't, like, and it doesn't even have to, that change doesn't even have to come internally from your team. Most of the second half of the book, I focused on what happens when things are storming organizationally. Like your team might be shipping, it might be in that flow state, things might be feeling effective. There still might be storms, organizational storms happening around you. And that's why I really wanted to focus on not just the human growth parts of management, but also the resiliency parts of management, because it's so important, especially when you want to protect your team from those things that are happening. There's so many skills and tips and tricks that you can employ to help make sure that your team, for as long as possible, continues in that performing stage, but probably more realistically is going to restart those forming stage feelings again.
Yeah. And before we dive into more around resiliency, I know one thing that you mentioned is communicating effectively,
Oh, yeah.
especially when it comes to sensitive information, because as leaders, we're often the bearer of, let's face it, bad news or news that we don't want to deliver. So what
Yeah.
are some strategies for doing this effectively?
Oh, it's funny when I talk to managers or people who are thinking about becoming managers. Sometimes I hear people being excited about management because they're, really interested in how groups of people come together. They're really interested in enacting change. They're really interested in supporting these individuals. I think that those are some like really healthy reasons to become a manager. But I also hear people be like, I can't wait to be able to like create change by myself or or have authority and power that I don't have without management, which is like a real double-edged sword, right? Like people often think you get more power and influence when you become a manager, and for sure you get access to tons more information. You have lots more I'm going to say power over how people are being compensated, hiring decisions. Like definitely you get some more decision making power, but honestly, as you just said, like this is a burden. Like this is not all you get to sit on a high horse and feel great about yourself. Like you do get a lot more access to information that is sensitive, that you probably can't share with your teammates, whether that's news that's coming down the pipeline or the real reason why someone was fired or other things that happen internally. You're going to have to start to build up those skills of like practicing not just like compartmentalizing, but also communicating effectively about things that are happening organizationally.
So do you have a couple of ways in which you could recommend people do that?
Totally. So the first thing I usually, recommend people think about is like, what are the primary messages that you want to be communicating or that you should be communicating based on what leadership says?
Mhm.
You may not agree with all that information, which is a whole subsection of the book. Because, like, my goodness, like there are definitely times in our careers where we'll need to disagree and commit, or we'll need to communicate something that we're not fully bought into. But before we get there, definitely develop those talking points. Try to figure out like what are the primary pieces of information that you do need to communicate, and then start to think about in what medium should you be communicating those, and to which different groups at which different stages. In
Mhm.
the book, I talk through, like what my former coworker calls a TikTok doc, which is effectively like a talking points communication plan with
Mhm.
times, with mediums, with what are the high level points we need to communicate at these stages, at which points in the conversation does this become no longer confidential, all that stuff. So start to think about, again, those high level messages and also your timing and mediums for communicating those messages.
Yeah.
Also start to think about like how people are going to respond. What can you
Mhm.
preempt, right? Like
Yeah.
who's going to freak out and about which things? What kinds of questions are people going to have? Start to come up with the frequently asked questions, doc, to prepare, or just like share with other leaders who have to communicate this information how you are going to be responding to some of the stickier potential questions that are going to come up.
Yeah, I think this is extremely valuable and an often overlooked step, but it
Totally.
really mitigates a lot of the anxiety that you have because it's going to come up. People are going to put you on the spot. So
Yeah.
even just a little bit of practice, even just a little bit of forethought into, hey, I'm going to be on the firing side of this. How do I respond? And taking that to, our own leaders can be really valuable. So I'm glad that you mentioned it.
Yeah, totally. I've found, as you said, so many people just skip over this because I find that especially newer leaders, although sometimes leaders with lots of experience do, they want to pretend that this is going to go great. There's going to be
Yeah,
no problems. No one's going to be mad about this. Or even if they are, they'll keep it to themselves. They're not going to say, call you out on the spot when you're standing up in front of 1,000 people with a microphone. It
totally.
happens. It's
Yep.
going to happen. Let's just prepare for it.
Yep, yep. Have your best case and your worst case scenario, and then things go according to how you sort of anticipated it. Now, all of this can be really tiring and cause us as leaders to either burn out or give up. So the last topic I want to tackle with you is how to go about building that resiliency.
Oh, totally. This comes up so much, not just again in my coaching conversations, but like throughout my time as a manager of managers. There's two primary things I see contributing to, like, let's say exhaustion outside of the normal, like everything is tough at work, or like we're dealing with a difficult conversation, or whatever. Those are the normal things that will drain our energy. But consistently I hear two things just the nature of being a manager brings up for folks. One is the context switching between different kinds of brains that we need to use. And the second one is honestly just like, it's tiring working with humans. Just like
Yeah.
baseline. And
Sure.
I'm a person who loves, talking one-on-one with folks. I do it all day. I'm a coach, right? But I even know at this point, maximum of 4 one-on-ones per day, that will, I'll be dead at the end of the day if I do any more. And again, this is translated to my coaching world, but also was true when I was a manager. Thank goodness I learned it back then. So in terms of the context switching, when you think about being a manager, what are you doing all day? You're having meetings thinking about strategy. You're having one-on-ones. You are trying to get work done, work on your own projects. There's tons of different things we do every day, and that each takes a different kind of brain. So when I think about my own brains, there was like the strategic thinking brain. There was the managing up brain. There was like the managing to my teammates brain. There was like working on analysis brain. Like there's so many different brains that I might be using. And if I have those meetings kind of back to back and interspersed, that is exhausting. So I need to go from one meeting where I'm like thinking about the future and maybe talking about confidential information, to going to my next meeting, which is one-on-one and someone's crying. And then going to my next meeting and I get to announce a promotion. It's like so much context switching. So one of the things I recommend managers try if they find that they're experiencing this, doesn't work for everybody, but it works for some people, is to color code your calendar based on the kinds of brains that you're using. And then effectively see if you can defrag it. Put, your strategic thinking brain stuff together. Put your one-on-one brain stuff together. Again, that other pitfall is like too much of one thing will also drain you. So I would not recommend, say, having 8 hours of one-on-ones in the same day. But start to see if you can move stuff around, reduce context switching, and measure over time what's draining your energy the most, that we can continue to iterate and see how to make it, a little bit easier on yourself over time.
Yeah, I think these are amazing best practices. Thank you, Laura, for sharing. And I know that there's a lot more that you cover in your book. So I highly recommend for those of you tuning in to grab a copy when it's out. Laura, for those who want to reach out to you after they have devoured your book, how would you recommend they get in touch with you?
Twitter's the best. I'm at Lara_Hogan on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, I'll be sure to include a link to your Twitter handle.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. That's it for this episode of Build. Be sure to share this episode with your teammates, your friends, and your boss. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive more episodes of Build. Ciao for now. Build is brought to you by amazing patrons. Our platinum patrons are Andrea Goulet, CEO and co-founder of Corgi Bites; Charbel Saman, founder of Sprintwell; Dee Gill, founder of Chime On; Jamie Hand; and Lauren Hassan, CEO and founder of Developer, as well as the following patrons. If you'd like to join them and support Build, please visit patreon.com/build. In exchange for your support, you'll receive perks like advanced copies of our books from authors highlighted on the show, special pricing on upcoming FemJunior courses, and more.